Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Alie-Cox, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my tight end tier list for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about 25 plus tight ends as I give you guys my perspective and opinions as to how the tight end position currently stacks up in my eyes. Of course, the tight end position year over year has been a very polarizing subject in fantasy football as we've seen an extreme amount of volatility. In fact, last season in 2020, in a half PPR scoring format, we saw only 3 tight ends produce over 150 fantasy points, while we saw 3 team defenses and 6 total kickers surpass the 150 total fantasy point mark. So it kind of speaks volumes as to what kind of volatility we as fantasy managers have experienced year over year. And I'm not surprised that in many of your leagues, you're either playing in a tight end premium where tight ends are getting an extra half point per reception in comparative to all other receiving positions. On top of the fact, there are some leagues that are completely abolishing the tight end position and just transferring them as to wide receivers because they are getting similar statistics, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. So again, though there have been a lot of changes to the fantasy landscape because of this volatility, I think it's ever so important to make sure that we are selecting the right tight end going into our 2021 fantasy football draft. And that's why I wanted to mention 20 plus tight ends, because I think there's a broad spectrum of players that have an ability and the potential opportunity to get into this conversation of being a weekly fantasy start. But it's a matter of being able to decipher that and figure out which of the available prospects are the guys that we're looking to invest in this upcoming season. Now, before we begin today's video, I want to thank you guys for the incredible support. Again, you guys are continuing to click that like button, subscribing to the channel, and helping grow this community. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for you guys to subscribe to the channel, because it not only helps me and helps me continue to do this on a daily basis to bring you guys fantasy football content, but it helps you get that much closer to winning a 2021 fantasy football championship. Again, as I continue to do this every day, I'm trying to help you guys, give you as much knowledge as I could possibly give within the video's context so that you make the right decisions during your upcoming season, whether that is during your draft, during the weekly season. Again, from weeks 1 through 18, I will be putting out running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback rankings on a weekly basis in order to help you make sure that your lineups are ready to go. And even by then, on Sunday mornings, 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, I will be here helping you set your lineups. So again, there's a lot of content to be had from this channel. So if you're trying to get an edge on your league mates, this is the channel that'll help you do it. So subscribe and help us get to that 40K marker. Being a crazy accomplishment if we can get there. Thank you very much in advance. Now, for those of you who are trying to take the next step and even gain a greater advantage on your league, Andrew Kirikov's 2021 Fantasy Football Draft Guide is now available. If you go down in the description of the video, there are 2 links there, one to my Patreon, one to the website. There are videos on both of those sites. Watch those videos if you are interested. It'll give you a little bit of a context as to what is inside the 2021 Fantasy Football Draft Guide and what you can expect. Thank you very much in advance. All right, so let's talk about the tight end position. I'm excited about this. Before we begin, again, timestamps are down in the description of the video for those of you who are looking for a specific player. If you just want me to talk about them, you go click on the timestamp. It'll go ahead and fast forward to that. And also, this is going to be for a half PPR scoring format, meeting everyone in the middle, whether you play in a standard or a full PPR, half PPR, goes ahead and kind of unifies that. All right, so let's get into this. Beginning off with the S tier. In my opinion, in the last couple days, as I've done the quarterback, wide receiver, running back tier lists, there have been times where I've thought, I literally only want to put one player in the S tier, but I can't justify that based on the fact that I only have 10 tiers on this list. So today, for the first time, we will be having an isolated player in the S tier because at the tight end position, there has been one man for the last 5 consecutive years that has finished as the #1 overall tight end. His efforts on a weekly basis advance beyond what a tight end is capable of and what we've seen from the tight end position year over year for the past decade. Travis Kelce, of course, is the lone S tier player, and it should be no surprise for many of us. The season that Travis Kelce had last year continues to solidify his fantasy value to the point where, yes, this season he's going in the first round, and I don't mind that overall value because of how effective he's been. In fact, since 2018, when Patrick Mahomes took over the starting position of the Kansas City Chiefs, I mean, Travis Kelce has gone to another level. With Alex Smith, he was averaging about 11 fantasy points per game. But then as soon as Patrick Mahomes took over the reins, in the 44 games that they've played together during the regular season, Travis Kelce's averaged 15.4 fantasy points per game. If you go ahead and you expand it to a 16-game basis, it's about 246 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format, which by all accounts, is a lot more than some of those top 10 tight ends that a lot of us are drafting in the first round. And there's the reason why Travis Kelce is coming off the board very quickly this year. But if we go ahead and isolate just his 2020 statistics, Travis Kelce was averaging 17.35 fantasy points per game. In terms of the entire grand scheme of the 2020 season, he had the 7th highest fantasy point per game average behind guys like Tyreek Hill, Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Devontae Adams. He is at the top tier of all the positions in fantasy football, and there's a reason why he gets as much respect as he does. Last season was, of course, his greatest statistical season he has put up in his career thus far. Hopefully he can continue to expand upon that, but his performance was only 0.24 points less than the second greatest fantasy tight end performance of all time, which is Jimmy Graham in the early 2010s when he used to play for the New Orleans Saints. So again, he was almost at that legendary level of being a top 2 fantasy performance of all time. But hey, top 3 will take it. Travis Kelce is an unstoppable fantasy prospect. And when we think about what kind of impact he has, on the league itself, the 17 fantasy points is great. But at the tight end position, when you're comparing tight ends to one another, like we are today on this tier-based list, I mean, it's unbelievable the kind of production he had. Last season, he finished as a top 10 tight end every single week except for once, which was week 7 against Denver. On top of that, he finished as a top 5 tight end for 10 weeks and finished as a number 1 overall tight end 5 separate times. I mean, what more could we ask of this guy? 2 out of the last 3 seasons, he's had double-digit touchdowns. He leads the Kansas City Chiefs in a Patrick Mahomes-led offense in terms of targets. He is the number 1 receiving option of that team. He continues to grow and become that much better every single year. I don't like the fact that he shaved his beard the other day. It kind of looked weird. I'm sure many of us agree upon that. But hey, listen, Travis Kelce deserves to be in the S tier and deserves to be standing up there alone because no one else has been able to compete with him for that number 1 tight end spot. I know Zach Ertz had a couple years there where he maybe could have, but wasn't able to bring down the king on the hill. And that is Travis Kelce going into 2021, of course. We move on to the beginning of our A tier. We have Darren Waller. Now, when we talk about Travis Kelce and how successful he has been, Darren Waller is beginning to get to that point where he's running stride for stride with him and may perhaps be able to take him in the future, but it's all a matter of whether or not the opportunity is going to be there and whether or not Darren Waller continues to improve on a yearly basis as he has thus far in the past 2 seasons. In fact, since 2019, Darren Waller has played 32 games for the Las Vegas Raiders. He's averaged 12.53 fantasy points per game. Great overall. Last season, if you isolate his statistics, he averaged 14.07 fantasy points per game and was a top 5 tight end in 9 of his 16 total games. Great statistics overall. Since 2019, of course, when I talk about him being stride for stride with Travis Kelce has had 269 total targets. In that same amount of time, Darren Waller has had 255 total targets. Darren Waller was responsible for the 4th most receptions in 2020 with 107. In a full PPR scoring format, when he goes in the middle of the second round, it is justified because when in fact Darren Waller is on the board and you think about what he provides to not only his team, but the advantage that he grants you at the tight end position, being able to grab him and see how much value he has going forward, it's just an unbelievable amount. On top of just receptions, in terms of the touchdown category, he had the 10th most amongst all receiving options last year with 9 and had the 10th most receiving yards amongst all receiving options in the National Football League. Those statistics alone separate him into a different class. If you want to go ahead and just compare him to receivers, Darren Waller would have been the number 9 overall wide receiver in a half PPR scoring format, and that's why I continue to justify the idea of drafting him in the second round, maybe at the turn. If you can get him in the third, my goodness, the value is just undeniable at that point, and you have to invest in a guy like Darren Waller. I think he's going to continue to improve. This offense continues to get better. I think, of course, Derek Carr looked very good last season in terms of his overall effectiveness, not turning over the ball as much, and being able to find Darren Waller in the red zone is going to be a huge factor as to whether or not he takes that next step. If he can get to that double-digit touchdown point, he can definitely be on the heels of Travis Kelce going into the 2021 season. All right, we move on to George Kittle. Okay, so George Kittle, unfortunately, we haven't really heard much of George Kittle. We haven't really talked about him very much, but it's mainly because George Kittle, every season, somehow, some way, is dealing with an injury. And though that may be the case, and that may scare many of you off, I still think that there's a lot of value to be had with George Kittle. Now, he's definitely not going as high as Darren Waller or Travis Kelce, and he will be going for a discounted price. But we've seen George Kittle on a yearly basis be a fantastic tight end option that separates himself from the pack. In fact, if we go back to 2018, he had a full 16-game season in which he had 88 grabs for 1,377 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. So we've seen him have elite levels of production. We just got to get back there this upcoming season. Now, in the last 38 games that he's played since 2018, he's averaged 13.04 fantasy points per game. Now, that doesn't include the games that he's left early with injury. Again, the injury thing is a reoccurring factor with him, and that's what you have to, anticipate. If you're going to invest in a George Kittle-like option, you have to understand that there is going to be, potential risk in that decision, but understand that there is just as much potential upside with him. The fact that he's averaged 13 fantasy points per game in the last 3 years, and now that we go into the 2021 season, we might get an improvement at the quarterback position for the San Francisco 49ers, going from Jimmy Garoppolo to Trey Lance, being able to air the ball out that much more. I think there is even more potential upside for George Kittle. A couple of the other statistics that I wanted to mention in regards to George Kittle and his overall productiveness. Since 2018, he's led all receiving options in the National Football League with 909 receiving yards after contact. Again, as soon as you get the ball in his hands, he is going to make plays. But his biggest problem thus far in his career, besides the injuries, which again we cannot predict, though we've seen a constant trend of it over his career. Maybe in fact he misses 1 or 2 games this year. Big deal, no problem. We're going to still get a great overall tight end in the weeks that we have him as our starter. The issue has been for George Kittle his lack of touchdown production. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the most touchdowns he scored in a season ever was 5, which was in 2018. Otherwise, he scored 4 touchdowns every now and then. If he can increase that count to potentially 8 to 10 touchdowns, then we can get ourselves into the conversation of George Kittle solidifying himself not only as an A-tier guy, but potentially even overtaking Darren Waller. But it's just a matter of time until we end up seeing that. It's all a matter of what we end up seeing from this 49ers offense. Is Trey Lance going to take over? Is he going to heavily target George Kittle? And if in fact that's the case, how much of an improvement we can see? Again, like I mentioned earlier with Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce went from an 11-point tight end to a 15-point guy just with the switch of quarterback from Alex Smith to Patrick Mahomes. If you switch Jimmy G to Trey Lance, you never know. You could see the next level of George Kittle going into the future. All right, we move on to our B tier of tight ends. So TJ Hockenson is a very interesting prospect going into the 2021 fantasy football season. I know he's dealing with an AC joint injury with his shoulder. That could be something of an issue, but we're going to keep our tabs on that, kind of see how it's going. Based on all the reports out of the Detroit Lions front office, it's not going to stop him from playing in week 1. So that's relatively promising to keep him out of action for the next couple weeks. He should be good to go. When we want to talk about the potential of TJ Hockenson going into the 2021 season, of course, we look to the past, we see what he was able to accomplish. In 2020, the guy averaged 9.17 fantasy points per game in the 15 contests that he played with Matthew Stafford. That level of production out of TJ Hockenson doesn't excite me that much, but it at least gives me an understanding of what his baseline is. Though he wasn't that productive and a lot of times was saved by weekly touchdowns, that's how the tight end position works on a weekly basis. You have to be saved by touchdowns, and even from the very top, there's a reason why Travis Kelce is up there. It's because he's scoring a consistent amount of touchdowns. So I don't want to hear any arguments about touchdowns being, his saving grace. That's every tight end saving grace. But the question is, going into this upcoming season, can we see that baseline of production and expand upon it? I think that's going to be the case. You bring in Anthony Lynn, the former head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. The offense that he ran there targeted the tight end position 100 times on a yearly basis. And in fact, with Hunter Henry, in the 26 games that Hunter Henry had played as of late, he got 169 targets. That's about 6.5 targets per game. Again, he should be able to see 100 plus targets in this Detroit Lions offense. On top of the fact that there's no more Kenny Golladay, no more Marvin Jones, Danny Amendola, they're all gone. They just cut Brashad Perriman earlier today. Besides Amon-Ra St. Brown, the rookie out of USC, Tyrell Williams, who again has missed a lot of time in the National Football League due to injuries recently, I don't really see there being anybody else to threaten the potential amount of targets that TJ Hockenson is going to be garnering this upcoming season. Now the question remains, can the Detroit Lions facilitate this tight end and get him to that next level and allow him to maybe even get to the A tier, but at least solidify himself as a B tier tight end? I think that'll be the case, and it's definitely going to be on the shoulders of Jared Goff. You bring in Jared Goff, and of course, switching Matthew Stafford out for him is definitely going to be a little bit of a downgrade, but I still think Jared Goff helps TJ Hawkinson's cause this upcoming season. And the reason why I believe so is because what I've seen from Jared Goff year over year with the Los Angeles Rams, and I've kept a close eye on him. As you guys know, I'm a Rams fan, but Jared Goff in 2019, from weeks 13 through 17 of the regular season, he funnel targeted Tyler Higbee, 10 plus targets a game on a consistent basis. In fact, in those 5 games, Tyler Higbee was averaging 17.14 fantasy points per game. In 4 of those contests, had over 100 receiving yards. An unbelievable amount of production went in his direction, and I think Jared Goff is ready to go into the 2021 season and continue to feed the tight end the ball. And yes, that was back in 2019, but when we look at what Jared Goff has done in the last 2 seasons with the tight end position, since 2019, we've seen the Los Angeles Rams have 2,102 receiving yards at the tight end position, which ranked 5th amongst all teams, and on top of that, had 264 dedicated targets to the tight end position, which also ranked 5th amongst all teams in the past 2 seasons. So we know Jared Goff is not shy to pass the ball to the tight end position. We know the offensive coordinator is there. We've seen the baseline of success from TJ Hockenson. I absolutely believe he expands upon it this year. We move on to Mark Andrews. I love Mark Andrews. I think he's a fantastic option, but there is a lot of volatility to be had with him. Besides the fact that he's averaged 10.91 fantasy points per game in the last 29 games with the Baltimore Ravens since 2019. I mean, those are great numbers. We'll take that, especially considering how dull the tight end position has been year over year. Seeing a fresh new face like Mark Andrews in the past 2 seasons has been fantastic, especially considering the fact that this young man has scored 17 touchdowns in the last 29 games. But the issue that continues to arise in regards to Mark Andrews is his inconsistency and volatility of play. In fact, in 4 of those 29 games, he scored 8 touchdowns. He has had multiple double touchdown games, which of course skews his fantasy points into one direction, but also has the other side of the coin in which, yes, you may have a 20-point performance from Mark Andrews against the Cleveland Browns or Cincinnati Bengals in a given week, but then a couple weeks later, he's putting up 4.5 points, and it's definitely going to hurt. But that's just the tight end position as a whole. When we talk about opportunity of play and what he has seen year over year, he has continued to get majority of Lamar Jackson's attention on the field. And though Mark Andrews doesn't play every single down, when he is on the field, a lot of the plays are set up for him based on the amount of snaps he plays in the routes run and his total target share of opportunity amongst the Baltimore Ravens receiving options. Since 2019, Mark Andrews has been number 1 amongst all tight ends in team air yard share, 28% of it going in his direction. On top of that, in terms of end zone targets, he has 37% of it, which is second amongst all players in the National Football League in the last 2 years. Those statistics are great, but again, like I mentioned, volatility. In the last 29 games, he's had 16 games of over 10 fantasy points. The other 13 games, less than. That is going to be the biggest difference maker as to whether or not he's going to be able to take his play to the next level. Can he go ahead and eliminate those inconsistencies? Can he continue to be a vital part of this offense and score touchdowns on a more consistent basis to give himself a little bit more stability? That is the question. But regardless, he is an end zone monster. Of course, like the stats I've mentioned, he will continue to succeed. Hopefully the receiving options getting better around him will pull pressure off of him as he continues to improve. The last option I wanted to mention is Kyle Pitts. Again, Kyle Pitts, I've talked about him a lot this offseason. Besides being the highest drafted tight end in NFL history, going 3rd overall to the Atlanta Falcons, he has shown a lot of talent, to say the very least, in his college days. A lot of people pretty much talk about him being a wide receiver, and based on his build, though he is a bigger wide receiver, I still think that, yes, he is a wide receiver. He's never going to put his hand in the dirt. We're probably often going to see this young man play in the slot position, play out wide like they do in Las Vegas with Darren Waller. They put him out wide. A lot of number 1 cornerbacks are trying to cover him, but they can't because the size differential and the level of speed is so much that you just can't compete with it. Now, when we talk about what Kyle Pitts has done in the past, just talking about his time at Florida last season, 43 receptions, 770 receiving yards, and 12 receiving touchdowns in just 8 total games played. That's insane. Now, you're going into an Atlanta Falcons offense, which again, Matt Ryan has thrown the ball 600 plus times each of the last 3 seasons. That's fantastic. They're going to be missing Julio Jones this year, who typically on a yearly basis, when he's fully healthy, is getting somewhere of 150 to 160 dedicated targets in his direction. So we have an offense that throws the ball a lot with a gunslinger of a quarterback. We have the number 1 receiving option of the past decade for the Atlanta Falcons gone. Yes, Calvin Ridley will fill his shoes, but there will be potential target opportunity going in the direction of Kyle Pitts. You bring in Arthur Smith, who used to be the tight ends coach for the Tennessee Titans, then became the offensive coordinator there, and of course utilized Jonnu Smith a lot last season, and even Anthony Firkser, who we'll talk about later today. But ultimately, you're bringing in a head coach that loves to use the tight end position. There's a reason why they went ahead and invested in Kyle Pitts. To have this kind of versatility within a player that has so much impact on the field, I think it's huge for the Atlanta Falcons. I know a lot of people are worried about what his potential is, considering in the past decade of the National Football League in terms of fantasy football, we've only seen 2 tight ends in their rookie seasons finish as top 12 tight ends. If you want to guess, you can go down to the comment section and guess. I'll go ahead and spoil it for you in 3, 2, 1. Evan Engram and Rob Gronkowski. Those are the only other guys in a half PPR that have been able to accomplish that. That's why people are worried about Kyle Pitts. I'm not worried. We move on to Logan Thomas. Again, Logan Thomas is a fantastic receiving option. Last season, he played the most snaps amongst all tight ends in the National Football League, played over 1,000 snaps, and in fact ran the most routes amongst all tight ends, 610. They want this man on the field, and it's mainly because of their offensive coordinator. Like I've talked about in the past, Ron Rivera brought over a lot of his coaching staff from when he was with the Carolina Panthers, now again with the Washington football team. And he brought over Scott Turner. He is the son of Norv Turner, former head coach of the San Diego Chargers in years past, but of course was the offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers for a couple years there. We of course have seen anything that Norv Turner has been associated with involve a tight end, whether it was Antonio Gates or even Greg Olsen. Of course, his son is going to follow in his shoes and continue that trend. As we saw Logan Thomas have the 3rd most targets amongst all tight ends last year, only behind Travis Kelce and Darren Waller with 105. And yes, he wasn't able to take advantage of every single target, but we also saw a variety of quarterbacks play it last year, whether it was Haskins, of course, Alex Smith, Taylor Heineke. I mean, we didn't see an elite level of play. Kyle Allen. Now that you bring in Ryan Fitzpatrick, I'm not saying that he's elite at the quarterback position. Not at any point will I ever be saying that. But there are some weeks in which Ryan Fitzmagic comes out and we see some magical production come out of nowhere. In fact, when I went ahead and looked at the last 2 seasons with the Miami Dolphins, in the games that Ryan Fitzpatrick played with Mike Gesicki, 19 total in fact, when they both started together and played fully, there was about 6.5 targets per game dedicated to Mike Gesicki, which again is going to lead to over 100 targets potentially for a guy like Logan Thomas in an offense that's focused on feeding him the ball. We're not seeing the quarterback position here with Ryan Fitzpatrick shying away from feeding him the ball. We've already seen it this preseason, and I think he's going to continue to expand and solidify himself as one of these top 7 overall tight ends. The next option is Mike Gesicki. Speaking of the Miami Dolphins, I think he himself is going to be able to build on what he's done in the last 2 seasons and continue to grow as a player. Again, he's a young player out of Penn State, bigger body, a huge red zone threat, which hopefully will continue to expand his role. He is really not a tight end. Yes, he has a tight end's body, but he's a wide receiver similar to a guy like Kyle Pitts. They use him in the slot position a lot. In fact, amongst all tight ends in the National Football League, he plays most in the slot in terms of total snaps, and he gets the most targets out of the slot. So this upcoming season with Tua at the quarterback position, what can we expect in comparison to what we saw with Fitzpatrick? Now, in the last 21 starts, Mike Gesicki has averaged 9.6 fantasy points per game, but with Tua, about 9.15 fantasy points per game while averaging 6 targets per game. This upcoming season, we'll see a little bit of an offensive coordinator change from the Miami Dolphins in comparison to last year. They did promote from the inside, of course, promoting their running backs coach and their tight ends coach to being co-offensive coordinators. So as of right now, I think this is going to be a tight end focused offense. I think Mike Gesicki with Tua has shown himself to have a lot of production. Those couple games last year in which he was getting 2 receiving touchdowns, a couple 20-point bombs that he dropped on us. I think there's a lot of potential of Mike Gesicki taking the next step with Tua. Again, a lot of the other receiving positions on this Miami Dolphins team continues to get injured. I mean, whether it's Fuller, Devontae Parker, Waddle, they just continue to rotate to the trainer's bench. But either way, I think Mike Gesicki, hopefully, if he stays healthy, can be a great option for us. Beginning with the D tier, we have Tyler Higbee. So this D tier is going to have a lot of players. And the reason why I wanted to go ahead and explain this beforehand is because, again, there's a lot of tight end options that can fall out of favor very quickly if they don't get the ample amount of opportunity and don't even deliver on it. There's a lot of guys that are going to get themselves, potentially 80, 90 targets this year, and if they can't deliver on it, we're going to find some trouble. So we'll talk about these guys as a whole, beginning with Tyler Higbee. So here's the thing about Tyler Higbee. We've, of course, seen that he can be a viable option. I talked about it in regards to Hockenson. In those, 5 weeks, from weeks 13 through 17 of the 2019 season, when he was a main focal point of Sean McVay's offense. The guy was averaging a 17.14 fantasy points per game. He had 4 games of 100 plus receiving yards, and again, in 5 games, 56 total targets. So the opportunity was there, and he delivered on it. Of course, in 2020, they didn't return back to that. Yes, he had a couple good games in which he scored some touchdowns, but he also had Gerald Everett in his back pocket. Let's not forget, in 2019, throughout that time, he didn't have Gerald Everett there. He was injured, so that's what allowed him to break out. He's going to be on the field for majority of the game. The Los Angeles Rams, in terms of their offensive scheme, they love to run a lot of 11 personnel with 3 wide receiver sets, and of course, one of the running backs being whoever their starter is, and Tyler Higbee on the field all at the same time. And yes, they do like to run some 2 tight end sets, but certainly not as much as their 11 personnel. So this upcoming season, with the improvement at the quarterback position, and hopefully with Gerald Everett gone, we can continue to shine a light onto what the potential is of Tyler Higbee. He has, of course, a lot of touchdown upside, and I don't think Matthew Stafford is shy of targeting a tight end or a big body target. Of course, doing that last year with Hockenson. I think he'll expand his role this year and potentially see himself even sneak into this top 12 conversation and solidify himself as, once again, a tight end 1. We have Robert Tonyan as our next option. Bobby Tonyan is a very interesting prospect, considering last year he had 11 receiving touchdowns, and we're most likely going to see a lot of regression out of him this upcoming season. Yes, Rodgers was an absolute animal last year, 48 passing touchdowns. If in fact we see some regression from Rodgers, I think we could still very easily see Robert Tonyan have himself 7 touchdowns. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility, considering, again, outside of Devontae Adams and maybe the running back stealing touchdowns, down in the red zone, it is really Tonyan's place to succeed. But besides the regression that we're potentially going to see at the touchdown category, I think that in terms of his overall opportunity of play, he didn't really see that many targets. I went ahead and I just wanted to take a kind of grander scale or scope as to what kind of opportunity Robert Tonyan had and how well he performed. Again, he was the number 3 overall tight end last year with 150 fantasy points. Again, that says a lot. When you're the number 3 with only 150, it's kind of a bad year. But in terms of opportunity, in the last decade of fantasy football on a half PPR scoring format, there's only been 5 total tight ends that have accomplished a tight end 1 season with less than 72 targets. 2 of those players came from last year, one being Robert Tonyan, another one being Jonnu Smith. So it's extremely rare to finish as a tight end 1 if you're not getting those receiving touchdowns, and the opportunity of play is going to sit at that 60-70 target range, which again isn't going to lead to that much success, especially in the receiving yard category or reception category in a PPR. So though I believe Robert Tonyan is going to see some regression, that is why I have him here in comparison to where he landed last season, having outproduced a lot of other tight end options. But I still think he's got himself a built-in potential for success based on who his quarterback is. All right, we move on to our next tight end option, which is Irv Smith. Now, Irv Smith is dealing with an injury. He is going to be, I guess, ailing from that until probably the first 2 weeks of the season, and then he will return. With that being said, it is a meniscus injury. They're going to go into his knee. They're going to clean it up. We've seen, running backs, even a couple years back, Joe Mixon, takes 2 weeks off, and then he's back and he's running for 30, rushing attempts, 200 yards. Doesn't matter. So it's not that big of an injury. It's not a big deal. Irv Smith's going to be completely fine. The question as to why he's gained so much traction this offseason mainly has to do with the fact that there's no more Kyle Rudolph. I know Tyler Conklin, the second string tight end on this team, could very easily go ahead and succeed without him in the lineup. But whoever has been the starting tight end of the Minnesota Vikings has shown to have a lot of value, considering, again, besides Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, that would be the 3rd receiving option of this team. So when we go ahead and we looked at what Irv Smith was capable of doing last season in the couple practice runs that he had without Kyle Rudolph, because Rudolph was injured, in the last 6 games of the season in which Irv Smith played, he averaged 10.01 fantasy points per game. Ultimately, I think there's a potential that Irv Smith can, of course, get into this top 12 tight end conversation based on the opportunities he's going to see, and, of course, the fact that if no one's competing with him in the target category at the tight end position for the Vikings, I think he could take that next step and evolve into the next, tight end stud that is one of these younger guys. But again, he's got to first come back from his injury. We have Jonnu Smith as our next option. I love Jonnu Smith mainly because he is a stud in terms of his red zone productivity. He had 8 touchdowns last year. I know he had a lot of games at the end of the season in which he wasn't healthy. He wasn't able to get a lot of targets in that offense. Again, when you go into a team that wants to, pretty much involve the tight end position by going and addressing it by bringing in Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, they are making a passive comment that may go over a lot of people's heads, but they want to use the tight end position. In the last 2 seasons, when they've lost Gronk, they haven't used the tight end position at all. In fact, they targeted the tight end position the least amount in the past 2 seasons combined. So now that you bring in these stud tight ends, you're making an effort to go ahead and feed them the ball. Whoever ends up being the quarterback for this team, whether it is Cam Newton or Mac Jones, are going to utilize him down in the red zone and throughout the field. He is an absolute stud of an athlete. They can use him out of the backfield as a rushing option, and I think that a lot of people are undervaluing the potential of Jonnu Smith. Again, another one of these young tight ends that could end up getting to that next level this year. Again, he was able to accomplish it last year with pretty much only half of the season of his play. The second half really was irrelevant. So as long as he can get back to what he was doing at the beginning of last year for the Tennessee Titans, I think he'll take it to the next level. Noah Fant is our next tight end option. Here's the thing with Noah Fant. He's dealing with an injury already. That's beginning to scare me a little bit. Again, that's why I'm starting to kind of move them down the list. Anybody who's dealing with injuries is beginning to frighten me a tad bit. But Noah Fant has shown that he can be a viable tight end option for the Denver Broncos. The question remains, can Noah Fant in this offense with Teddy Bridgewater find success? Teddy Bridgewater, year over year, at times shows that he wants to target the tight end position with Jared Cook when he was with the New Orleans Saints. And then last year, there was just no involvement. I think it matters as to who the offensive coordinator is. Luckily for them, Pat Shurmur is the offensive coordinator for the Denver Broncos. They targeted the tight end position last year, 130 plus times. So as long as Noah Fant can stay healthy, which he isn't already, which is definitely going to hurt his overall production if in fact that nagging injury is going to continue, I think he could end up being a 10-plus point play every single week. It's just a matter of time until we see whether or not he's going to pan out there. Because he did show glimpses last year, especially at the beginning prior to his injury, that he was putting up double-digit fantasy points, scoring touchdowns, and was able to be a fantastic option for this team, and especially a young quarterback like Drew Lock. But as of right now, it's just a matter of whether he can stay healthy. And when we have to worry about that at the tight end position, I don't want anything to do with it. So we just got to keep our eye on him as of right now. The last tight end option for this tier is Dallas Goedert. So the issue that I have with Dallas Goedert is that he has a lot of hype surrounding him without really producing much of a substance. Yes, he missed time last year with an injury, but he still has Zach Ertz in this offense. And Zach Ertz, yes, he's only one season removed from being a top 3 tight end every single year. So in my opinion, when we go into this upcoming season and I see that Jalen Hurts is definitely targeting both tight end options, it is going to potentially hurt the overall production of Dallas Goedert. And yes, he is the younger option, and they want to go ahead and potentially move Zach Ertz, whether it is in a trade or something of that extent. In my opinion, I think Dallas Goedert is going to see targets, but not to the extent of where he's going to get into this top 8 conversation. I think he's at the back end of this D tier based on the fact that, again, yes, he will be a focal point of that offense, but unless he's getting a wide variety of end zone targets, red zone targets, and scoring touchdowns, I don't think that the receiving yards and the receptions for him is going to be able to take him to that next level. And that is why he kind of maintains this current position. We move on to the E tier. Speaking of tight ends that are outright just 100% just touchdown fiends, let's talk about Rob Gronkowski. Last year, 7 touchdowns for this offense, 600 receiving yards. But the only difference this year, you have O.J. Howard returning, going to make a difference. And of course, you have everyone healthy off the rip. You have Godwin back, Antonio Brown back, Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones will be full go out the rip. And then you have Giovanni Bernard coming in on third downs. I know Brady is going to continue to feed him the ball, and that's why I have him here in this E tier. But I do expect a little bit of a regression this season in comparison to last year in terms of total targets, which will again affect his overall productivity. His red zone prowess is going to continue to sustain itself based on the fact that, again, him and Brady have that combination. But outside of that, he's going to be a very volatile play this year. We have Jared Cook, similar to a Gronkowski. They aren't getting that many targets. In fact, in the last 2 seasons for the New Orleans Saints, Jared Cook has gotten about 60 to 65 targets per season. Now, of course, the Los Angeles Chargers offensive coordinator is Joe Lombardi, former quarterback coach of the New Orleans Saints. He's bringing over Jared Cook to use him and help him kind of facilitate for Justin Herbert because they lost Hunter Henry this season. But ultimately, Jared Cook is a touchdown monster. He has scored, 16 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons with the New Orleans Saints. I think that's great. In 16 touchdowns in 29 games, that's just as much as Mark Andrews. And you see where Jared Cook is and where Mark Andrews is. That's the biggest difference maker. I think Jared Cook could very easily get into a conversation of being a top 15 overall tight end as long as he has the eye of Herbert. And it really doesn't seem like it's out of the realm of possibility. He just needs to see a viable amount of targets, and then we can get Jared Cook on the road putting up a lot of points. We have Austin Hooper as our next option. Austin Hooper took a little bit of time to kind of activate for the Cleveland Browns last year because, again, you still have David Njoku there. But I think we've kind of determined how this rotation is going to work at the tight end position. Of course, Austin Hooper is going to be the 1A at the position, and he's going to be a red zone threat year over year. He has kind of built his relationship with Baker Mayfield, and especially towards the back end of the season when Baker Mayfield was starting to, ascend to his, top 12 quarterback standing at the back end of the year, Austin Hooper was following suit and being able to garner as many targets as he possibly could. Again, there was one of those games last year where the entire receiving core of the Cleveland Browns were out, and Austin Hooper definitely benefited from it. But either way, I think as we continue through time, this relationship is going to build. Austin Hooper has been a top 12 quarterback in years past with the Atlanta Falcons, so he can certainly get back to that area, but it's a matter of whether he's going to see enough targets to get there. I don't think that'll be the case, and that's why I leave him in this E tier. Anthony Firkser, he is one of my sleeper options this year. When we talk about what the Tennessee Titans have at the tight end position, again, they lost Jonnu Smith, but they also lost Arthur Smith, their offensive coordinator. Now, the Tennessee Titans did exactly what they did a couple years back when Matt LaFleur left the Green Bay Packers. They hired from within their tight end coach to their offensive coordinator. They've once again done that this year. They're pretty much promoting their tight end coach to being their offensive coordinator. The fact that your offensive coordinator is a tight ends coach, in my opinion, gives you that much more value because the coach knows whether or not Anthony Firkser is going to be at that level. He got himself 50 plus targets last year in this offense. We saw a couple big games there last year, one in which he got double digit targets, had over 100 receiving yards and like 8 catches. We can see him very easily fill into this offense that is going to have Derrick Henry, A.J. Brown, Julio Jones pulling all the attention. And over the middle, Anthony Firkser could make a lot of noise on a low-key basis considering where you can draft him. I don't think he's even being drafted in a lot of leagues. Gerald Everett is the next option here. Again, Gerald Everett in a Seattle Seahawks offense that has not had a healthy tight end year over year is a great option, but it's a matter of whether he's going to see enough targets. Again, that is the biggest question for all of these guys. I think Russell Wilson throwing 34 plus touchdowns 5 out of the last 6 seasons is going to definitely give Gerald Everett a little bit of an edge over a lot of other tight ends, considering their offense is going to score in a vast amount of volume. But as of this current moment in time, until Gerald Everett takes that next step and proves to us, he's going to sit here in the F tier. Evan Engram. He is another tight end that is dealing with an injury. We're going to have to figure out where the heck he stands. But last year, he had 109 total targets. Did he deliver on those opportunities? Absolutely not. But with that being said, I still think that there is a potential for Evan Engram to get to the next level. We know how Jason Garrett wants to use his tight end position. He wants to just continue to throw the ball in their direction, and he's done it in years past with Jason Witten. But I know they have Kyle Rudolph there. They have Kenny Golladay there. They got a lot of pieces to feed. They went in the first round and drafted a wide receiver. So with that said, I think Evan Engram could be a good option, but he just hasn't done it since his rookie season. All right, we move to Blake Jarwin of the Dallas Cowboys. Blake Jarwin is coming off an ACL injury. I know Dalton Schultz had 89 total targets at the tight end position last year for the Dallas Cowboys. If Dak is ready to go, and the entire defense is, of course, focused on Zeke, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, Blake Jarwin is going to sneak around, just like Anthony Firkser, like I just talked about, and be a low-key good option because the tight end targets are very viable in this offense. Again, Kellen Moore continuing to use the tight end position on a consistent basis, whether it is 11 or 12 personnel. I think Blake Jarwin could be a big part of this Dallas Cowboys offense this season. We move on to Hunter Henry. Unfortunately, in comparison to Jonnu Smith, I think Hunter Henry is going to play second fiddle at the tight end position. But, we've seen, of course, the New England Patriots use 2 tight ends in the past, whether it was Gronk and Aaron Hernandez. They could very easily get back to that 2 tight end offense in which they're consistently just targeting them and having them be the number 1 and 2 receiving options of the team. Hunter Henry's dealt with a lot of injuries this offseason and throughout his career, so it's just a matter of whether he can stay healthy. I still think it's going to take a little while for him to at least adjust and at least this offense to find a singular receiving target that is a stud outside of course, Jacoby Myers and Jonnu Smith. So again, seeing the third amount of targets on this team, maybe even James White taking the third amount of targets, I think Hunter Henry is going to play a very limited role this upcoming season. We move on to Jimmy Graham. I know Jimmy Graham was a stud last year, has scored a lot of touchdowns year over year, but the question is, with Cole Kmet getting more and more opportunity over the years, can he eventually take over the job? I know Jimmy Graham's on his final year of his contract here with the Chicago Bears, and yes, he's going to be garnering a lot of dead cap space considering how much they have invested in him. So therefore, they're going to throw him out there. They're going to use him as much as possible, but he's mainly a teacher until otherwise kind of deemed. In terms of red zone opportunities, the Chicago Bears threw the ball to the tight end position a lot last year. Of course, when you have Jimmy Graham there, he is going to succeed. But again, this upcoming season, I'm just a little cautious with him. I think if, in fact, he can eventually start getting rolling with Andy Dalton early or Justin Fields, maybe I'd be looking to take a couple weekly flyer options on him when there's bye weeks. But outside of that, I'm staying away. Eric Ebron, he's a good option. Played well last year, but they drafted Pat Freiermuth in the first round. That already is a red flag for me. I think we're going to see a little bit less opportunity for Eric Ebron this year. And of course, you've got 3 other wide receivers and a Najee Harris in that offense to feed first. So that's why he takes his backseat. We have Zach Ertz. Again, like I mentioned with Dallas Goedert, there is going to be a potential for Zach Ertz to be a huge part of this offense. But I think this team wants to continue to move away from him, potentially even trade him before the season begins. So it's just a matter of whether this offense is going to run 2 tight end sets. I know in years past with, of course, Doug Peterson and or Frank Wright as the offensive coordinator of this team, we've seen a lot of utilization of the tight end position, but I'm not sure if that's what the Philadelphia Eagles want to do going into 2021. Therefore, Zach Ertz, we'll see how you kind of pan out, my guy. Adam Trautman, dealing with an injury this offseason, but again, the Saints don't have that many receiving options until Michael Thomas comes back. That's why he's a potential option. Alie-Cox, though, again, the tight end position is a rotation for the Colts. I think Carson Wentz, Frank Wright, they like to target the tight end position. Alie-Cox, former basketball player, you just got to throw him the ball in the red zone, and he's going to be able to find himself some value there. Hayden Hurst, he's going to be playing second fiddle to Kyle Pitts, but he's still going to get himself, I think, 40 to 50 targets. But are we going to really invest in him? Not really. Just want to go ahead and mention him. And the last 2 options, Cole Kmet, again, who will be siphoning from Jimmy Graham, and Tyler Kroft. Tyler Kroft was just signed to the New York Jets, scored 2 receiving touchdowns in the preseason with Zach Wilson. The question is, if you have the offensive coordinator of the San Francisco 49ers going to the New York Jets and bringing his entire zone scheme there, and of course how much they love to use George Kittle, maybe they want to go ahead and use a tight end position in New York and help their young quarterback with a safety blanket. Now that is all official, these are my 2021 tight end tier list players, giving you guys some perspective as to how I think it is all going to break down this upcoming season. Again, there's a lot of injuries to keep tabs on, so we're going to see this list fluctuate. Rankings are always subject to change, but make sure if you like today's video, click the like button down below, subscribe to the channel, go down in the description of the video if you're trying to get an extra edge on your league, whether it is via the Patreon or just the draft guide on the website. Thank you very much, everybody. I do appreciate you spending your time here today. Until tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.